This rainy evening, I was walking home after a long day at the university. The streets were empty, and only the sound of rain falling on the asphalt broke the silence. I hid under a large umbrella, trying not to get my shoes wet. I didn't plan to meet that evening, but when I approached the transition, his eyes met mine. He was standing under a lamp on the opposite side of the street as if waiting for someone. A man with green eyes, blonde hair, and a cool sore on his face. His gaze was calm, but at the same time full of something unusual. I did not know that he was familiar to me, but this feeling of something magical in the air did not leave me. I stopped, puzzled by his look. He smiled, nodded his head, and approached me. His voice was low and calm when he addressed me. "I'm sorry, but it seems you forgot your umbrella," he said with a smile and pointed to my umbrella, which was already half closed. I felt nervous, not knowing if he really meant me or if it was just a chance meeting. I came closer and noticed that he was also carrying an umbrella. His features were expressive and his posture radiated some inner strength. At first, I was a little confused, but his smile dispelled my doubts. "My name is Alexander," he added, holding out his hand in greeting. "And you?" he asked, looking at me with his piercing green eyes. I answered, not knowing why, but I immediately felt a strange attraction in his gaze. The next day, we met again. He was standing near the same cafe when I passed by. At first, I wanted to just walk past, but his gaze stopped me. "You look kind of strange today," he said with a smile, and I saw him tilt his head as if he wanted to know more. I didn't know why I stopped, but we started talking, first about the weather, then about books, music. And the more I talked to him, the more feelings I started to feel. His calmness and confidence drew me in, but there was also a mystery about him that I couldn't explain. "You look like you know how to help me without even asking," I said, and he just smiled. His smile was both warm and hidden, which left me wondering. We spent more time together, and each meeting became more emotional. Sometimes we went to the park, talking about everything and nothing. His eyes were always very attentive, and I couldn't help but notice how he paid attention to the smallest details. One day, he showed me old photos of his family. They were all black and white, with serious yet gentle faces. "This is my mother," he said, pointing to the photo. "She was very strong, and I always tried to be like her." It was one of those moments when I understood that his every gesture, every word carries a deep meaning. I looked into his green eyes and felt something change in me. We continued to see each other more and more often. I began to feel that with every look from him, with every smile of his, my heart beats faster. It was strange because I always kept my distance from people, but with him, everything was different. He became a part of my thoughts even when we were not together. One day, while we were sitting on a park bench, our hands accidentally touched each other. That touch was brief, but it made my heart bloom. I raised my head and met his gaze. In his green eyes, I saw the same anxiety and desire as in mine. It was new to me to be so close to someone and feel that it was right. After that moment, everything changed. I began to feel how my feelings for him gradually developed. We became more open to each other, and our conversations became more and more personal. Once I asked him about his dreams, and his answer surprised me. "My biggest dream is to find someone who can share my life, who will understand me without words," he said. I thought about his words because they resonated so much with my own desires. Then I realized that my feelings for him were not just sympathy. It was something more, something that made my heart beat faster even when I wasn't around him. From that moment, I began to look at him with different eyes. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore, and the next day I decided to talk openly about it. We were sitting in the same park where it all started. I took his hand and looked into his eyes. "I don't know how it happened, but I'm starting to feel more than just a crush on you," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid he'd be able to hear it. He paused, but then smiled. His gaze softened even more, and he replied, "I feel it too, but I was afraid you wouldn't want to hear it." It was that moment when the heart falls into place and you feel that everything is changing. Our relationship began to develop rapidly. However, as always, not everything was so perfect. On one of the evenings when we were supposed to spend time together, I saw him in the company of another girl. My heart sank with pain, and I could not understand why this happened. I didn't know what to do and decided to leave without saying a word. The next day, he came to me apologizing. "You have to understand that I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. I listened to him, but my heart was still disappointed. I didn't know if I could trust again. After that incident, we didn't talk for several days. He tried to explain what happened, but I wasn't ready to listen. Only when he appeared on my doorstep with a bouquet of flowers, I realized that I couldn't leave it like that. He apologized, saying that his behavior was wrong and that I was the most important person in his life. "I don't want to lose you," he said with such desperation that my heart softened. I looked at him and realized that I didn't want to let him go either. We hugged, and although there was still uncertainty, I knew that I was ready to go through any difficulties with him. We started a new phase in our relationship after that evening. Alexander tried to show that he was ready to work on himself. We no longer avoided difficult topics, and our conversation was open and honest. That same evening, we walked through the park, holding hands, and I felt how important this small victory was, our first real steps forward together. He looked at me and said softly, "I don't want to lose you anymore. I'll try to always be there for you." I smiled as I felt the feelings I had for him only grow stronger. It was the first real reconciliation, and it gave me hope for the future. Time passed, and our relationship became stronger. But somehow a new test appeared in my life. I received news about my mother's serious illness. It was devastating news for my family, and I felt the whole world come crashing down. Alexander was nearby. Without further ado, he was just there when I needed support. He helped me organize trips, was ready to leave everything to be near me. It was more than just sympathy. He actually understood what I was going through, and his presence gave me peace. I felt how his support became indispensable, and how I opened my heart to him more and more. Over time, I began to feel how my perception of myself and the world around me was changing. Alexander became not just my friend, but a person with whom I wanted to share my life. We went on a trip to get away from everyday worries and see new horizons. Therefore, one summer day, we went to the mountains. I couldn't believe how my perspective on life had changed. Vacationing together made me feel that when we are together, everything will be fine. He showed me new places, told me stories from his life, and I discovered him even more as a person, and not just as a partner. Our trip lasted several days, and every moment together became important for me. We shared our deepest feelings, laughed at small things, and even remained silent, enjoying each other's presence. In the evenings, sitting by the fire, I felt that we were becoming even closer. "You know, I never thought I'd find someone who would understand me like this," he said, looking into the fire. I looked at him, and there was such sincerity in his eyes that I felt my heart open even more. But, as in any story, new obstacles began to appear. We returned to the city, and I felt our relationship being tested by real life. Responsibilities, work, stress. All this began to put pressure on us. I noticed how withdrawn he was at times, and it worried me. "What happened?" I asked him one evening. He sighed, looking at me. "Sometimes I'm afraid you'll find out I'm not the person you think I am," he replied. His words stayed in my head, and I realized that our relationship needed even more work. We spent a few days in silence, trying to sort out our feelings and problems. He became more withdrawn, and I felt a distance between us. However, this did not mean that we stopped talking. Each of us was looking for ways to cope with the situation in our own way. I decided to take the first step by inviting him to a favorite cafe where we first met for dinner. "Let's try to start again, without all that bothering us," I said as he sat down next to me. His gaze softened and he nodded. I felt both of us begin to recover what we had lost. After dinner, we went to the park to walk and talk. I didn't know how to raise important issues, but I knew I had to. We walked along the path, and I collected my thoughts. "What's next?" I asked. His answer was just as uncertain as I felt. "I don't know. But we have to figure it out together." Those words caused a wave of peace in me, and I felt that I was not alone in this. We didn't find a clear answer, but the fact that we were willing to look for it together was an important step forward for me. The following days became a period of quiet but important rapprochement for us. We didn't rush, we didn't put pressure on each other. I began to understand that not only big words and moments are important in a relationship, but also small, imperceptible signs of attention. One day, after a hard day at work, I came home and saw that Alexander had left me a note with warm words and flowers that he had bought for me. It was a simple gesture, but it melted my heart. "You are important to me," he wrote. It was that support that helped me regain faith in us. However, over time, we realized that life cannot be just an idyll. Reality had to be faced, and it wasn't always pretty. Work, family issues, unexpected problems. All this became a real test for us. Alexander began to spend more time at work, and I was increasingly left alone with my thoughts. One evening, on my way home, I felt how hard it was for me to keep everything inside. We met again, and I told him how I felt. His reaction was sincere and caring. "I'll be here, don't worry," he said, taking my hand. And I felt that I would be able to share my experiences with him again. Time passed, and although life continued to bring new challenges, I felt that our relationship grew stronger. We laughed together, supported each other together, and it gave me the feeling that anything can be overcome. One night, after we returned from a walk, he suddenly took my hand and whispered, "I love you." These were the words I had been waiting for so long but couldn't say. They spoke from him without coercion, and I felt my heart blossom. "I love you too," I answered, and these words were as warm as the sun itself. One day, when we were sitting on the terrace of a cafe, he unexpectedly spoke about his past. I noticed that sometimes he avoided talking about it, but this time his words became open and heavy. "I was wrong about many things before. I was afraid to trust and be open," he said, and I saw how the difficulties he had experienced were reflected on his face. "But with you, I feel like everything changes." I didn't know what to say. There was so much truth in his words that I couldn't help but feel them penetrating deep into my heart. We sat next to each other in silence, and I could feel how our relationship was strengthening, how we were overcoming old barriers together. After that moment, I began to feel that we were approaching a new stage in our relationship. He wasn't holding on to his secrets anymore, and that gave me confidence. However, my own secrets began to weigh on me. I increasingly felt the need to open up and show myself as I really am. One evening, when we walked along the embankment, I gathered my thoughts and decided to talk. "There are things I've never talked about," I began, and he paused, waiting to continue. I talked about my fears and worries, and when I finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. But then his words were sincere. "I'll be there like before. Don't be afraid." Although we tried to work on ourselves and our relationship, the real challenges were still ahead. Alexander got a new job offer that could change his life, but it meant that we would be apart for a while. It was a difficult decision for both of us. One evening, when he shared his plans with me, I felt everything inside me tighten. "I don't want to leave you," he said. I knew it was an important moment, but I couldn't deny that it was also important for his career. That night, we sat side by side in silence, understanding that the future would be a test for us, but we were ready to go through it together. After long conversations, we came to the conclusion that, although it is difficult, Alexander should go to realize himself. It was not an easy decision for us, but we both knew it was necessary. After his departure, I was left alone with my thoughts and feelings for a while. It was a difficult time, but I felt that it would help us strengthen our relationship, even at a distance. He wrote to me every day, and each of his letters was like a small piece of his heart that he left for me. A few months later, he returned. When I saw him at the station, my heart beat faster and I couldn't help but smile. He approached me, and I felt my anxiety and sadness finally disappear. "I'm back, and now I'm not going anywhere," he said, hugging me. I felt how all our difficulties and trials only made us stronger. We were standing at the station among the crowd, but at that moment there were only two of us, and all I felt was the confidence that together we would overcome everything. After his return, we felt that our relationship took on a new meaning. Every moment spent together seemed more important and meaningful. However, despite the fact that we were together, the reality of life did not release us from our duties. Alexander began to devote more time to work, and I to my projects, which required more and more attention. But this time, we knew that we could overcome any difficulties if we supported each other. We agreed that at each stage we would openly talk about our experiences and desires. This became the basis of our new closeness. Despite all the difficulties, we always found time for shared moments of joy. One evening, we went to a concert of our favorite band, and this night became special for us. As the music rang in our ears, I felt our hearts beating in unison. Alexander held my hand, and we laughed together, experienced each song together. This moment was so simple, yet so important to both of us. When the concert ended, we went outside, and I felt that it is moments like these that shape our history. He looked at me and said, "Those were the best times I've had with you." But new difficulties appeared at Alexander's work. He began to feel excessive stress and fatigue from constant tasks and deadlines. He was often absent from home, and I could see him becoming more and more exhausted. One evening, when he returned, I noticed how his shoulders were heavy and his eyes were tired. I went up to him and hugged him, trying to give him all my support. "Don't worry, I'm with you," I said, and his gaze softened. It was hard for him, but he knew he could get through it when he had my support. Soon, Alexander received a job offer that could change his career. It was a great opportunity, but again, it meant that we would be at a distance. We talked about it at length, and although I understood that this opportunity was important to him, I still felt pain at the thought of the distance. "I don't want to be far from you," he said, "but this is a chance for me to change everything." I knew he was right, and I was ready to support him, even if it meant we would be apart again for a while. "I will wait for you," I answered, and he looked at me with gratitude and love. The following weeks were full of uncertainty. Alexander was preparing to move, and I stayed at home, looking for peace amidst all the emotions. We often talked about our feelings, but each time we understood that there were still many difficulties ahead of us. However, one thing remained constant. We were both willing to fight for our relationship, even if we were put to the test. Every breakup, every decision we made together was another step towards understanding how important this connection is to us. Alexander left. And although we talked about it a lot, when he left, I felt an emptiness that pressed heavily into my heart. We kept in touch through texts and calls, but it wasn't the same. The distance made me realize how important he is to me, and how deep a connection we have developed during this time. He often wrote to me that he was very sad. I, on the other hand, tried to find a way to cope with the absence by working on my projects and maintaining routines. However, even during this period of separation, I could feel our feelings only getting stronger. Several months passed, and although the distance was difficult, Alexander decided to return. He wrote to me that he understands how much I feel this emptiness and that he cannot stay away from me. When he returned, I was standing at the station, and my heart was beating faster with excitement. He approached me, and in his eyes I saw a familiar warmth. "I'm back," he said, and those words were the best words in the world to me. I threw myself into his arms, and all I could say was, "I'm glad you're home." Alexander's return was a new beginning for us. We spent more time together, getting back into the habit of being around each other. One day, we went on a little weekend to spend time just the two of us, without all the worries and worries. We visited a small town in the mountains where there was only us, nature, and our desire to be together. He held my hand, and I felt how my feelings for him change, how our connection is restored, and how we find again what we have been looking for so long. Rest in the mountains became not only physical recovery, but also an opportunity for us to discuss all the questions that we discovered for ourselves after our return. One evening, sitting by the fire, we started talking about what we really wanted in life. "I was always afraid that I might lose you if I wasn't open," I said, and he replied, "Me too, but I believe our feelings are stronger than any doubt." We sat there listening to the roar of the fire, and I felt my heart blossom again. It was our real conversation, without fear and without obstacles. After the mountains, we headed back to the city, and even though we both knew that reality was already waiting for us, We felt that now we were able to go through any difficulties together. In the evening, sitting on the balcony of our apartment, we looked at the city lights. "How do you imagine our future?" he asked. I smiled at him and replied, "We're together and that's enough. We'll find our way, no matter what lies ahead." His gaze became even warmer, and I realized that with him I was ready to face any challenges. One morning, when we woke up together again after a night on the town, Alexander began to tell me about his childhood. It was a part of his life that he rarely mentioned. I was a pretty introverted guy, and I never felt understood. He said as we sipped our morning coffee, "You have become my greatest discovery." I listened to him, and my heart blossomed from these words. There was something so gentle in his gaze that I felt another moment of our deep connection approaching. These small discoveries about him became important to me, and I realized that I was more and more ready to share my own story. And although we opened up to each other more and more, not all problems disappeared. Alexander began to feel pressure at work, and it began to affect our relationship. He was busy, and I began to feel the distance again. One evening, when I returned home, I saw him sitting at the table, irritated and exhausted. "I don't like all this," he said, looking at me. I felt my heart sink because I knew it wasn't just his problems. It was ours, too. "We'll get through this together," I said. And though he didn't respond right away, I could see the gratitude in his eyes. Over the following weeks, we worked together to overcome these challenges. I helped Alexander with his problems at work, and he supported me when I felt that I could not cope with my own experiences. It was a time when we became even closer, when we realized that the strength of our relationship is not backing down from each other, even in the most difficult moments. I saw him start to smile again, and we went through some important milestones with him, restoring inner harmony and finding balance in our lives again. He told me, "You were my light in dark times." Despite the difficulties, we found time for small joys. One evening, when we were walking in the park, I saw him looking at me with such warmth that I couldn't help but smile. "We'll do whatever we want, right?" I asked, feeling our bond grow stronger. He raised his head and looked at me with a gentle smile. "Yes, together." These simple words filled me with such joy that I felt my heart beat in unison with his words. We were ready to overcome all obstacles, because now every moment together was important. After all the trials, we realized that the greatest strength of our relationship is not what we went through together, but the fact that we learned to talk openly about our feelings. We looked to the future, knowing that together we could overcome any difficulties. "Are you ready to go with me wherever life takes us?" Alexander asked. I looked at him and felt my heart respond to these words. "Yes, ready," I answered. And it wasn't just words. It was a promise to go forward together. Life returned to its usual routine, but I felt that very soon everything would change. Alexander received an offer that could change our future. He got the opportunity to work abroad, and although I was happy for him, I felt a whirlwind of emotions start inside me. Distance. Distance again. I wondered if we could go through this again. We were sitting in the same cafe where we first met. "I don't want you to go," I said, even though I knew this was an important opportunity for him. Alexander, smiling softly, took my hand. "I want you to be with me wherever I am." After our conversation, I was left with the feeling that we will again have to make important decisions. I went for a walk, trying to calm my thoughts. The park was empty, just me and the shadows of the trees. And then I realized I cannot live in fear of the future. If it is my decision to be with him, then I must act without fear of change. He and I have been through so much together, and I don't want to lose what we've built. I decided that it would be more correct not to stand still, but to support him no matter what happened. A few days later, I packed my things and left with Alexander. It was a new step in our life. I was leaving my city, my routine, but with him, I was starting a new chapter. We were going to another country, and although I was worried, I felt it was the right thing to do. When we got to the new place, he hugged me and said, "You are not alone. I am near." I felt how he became my support, and I became his. Together, we are ready to start a new life. Life abroad brought us new challenges and opportunities. Alexander quickly found a new job, and I began to adapt to the new environment. Every day was full of new experiences. We explored a new city together, tasted unusual food, and got to know the culture. One day, walking through the streets, we came across a small restaurant, which became our favorite place. In the evenings, we often came there, sat at a small table, and laughed, discussing the day. I felt how together with him, I was opening new horizons. A few months later, when we had already adapted well to our new life, new challenges began to appear. Alexander was engrossed in his work, while I faced difficulties in searching for new career opportunities. However, we always found time for each other to support and advise. One day, sitting on the balcony of our new apartment, Alexander looked at me and said, "We've been through so much together, but I know that with you, I'm ready for anything." I looked into his green eyes and answered, "Yes, we will pass any test together." And I knew that it was true. Together, we would overcome any difficulties, no matter what happened. Somehow, after we lived together in a new city for several months, I realized that our future cannot be determined only by challenges and difficulties. Alexander and I started talking about our dreams. It was an ordinary dinner at home. We were sitting at the table, and he quietly asked, "What do you want to see our future look like?" I thought about it and answered, "I want us to travel together, get to know new worlds so that our dreams are always on the same path." Alexander smiled and said, "I want the same thing, and I'm ready to work on it to achieve our goals together." We dreamed, and it gave me faith that our future can be whatever we want it to be. However, not even a few days passed when the old problems began to remind themselves again. Alexander received a call from an old friend who asked for help in an important matter. I noticed how he became more serious and his look changed. "I have to go. It's important," he said, and I felt my heart sink again. "Don't worry, I'll be back soon," he added, but I knew this trip would take a long time. I smiled, even though inside I was burning with the question of whether we would be able to endure this ordeal again. The time of separation, although short, was difficult. Alexander left, and I was left alone. Work absorbed me, but thoughts about him did not leave me for a minute. We kept in touch via text, but nothing could replace the moments when he was around. I sat at home, looked at our photo on the shelf, and remembered all our happy moments. I feel like every minute without him has been a trial, but it's also been a reminder of how much his presence means to me. And I knew we would get through this together, even if it was a temporary separation. A few weeks later, Alexander returned, and it was like recovery. When I saw him at the station, my heart beat faster again. He was the same, with warm green eyes that always gave me peace. "You looked great," he said, walking up to me. I replied with a smile and simply said, "I'm glad you're back." And now we were together again, and I felt that even after all the trials, our relationship is only getting stronger. We have overcome another obstacle, and this only strengthened my belief that we will overcome all difficulties together. With Alexander's return, we started talking about the future again. This time, we didn't just dream, we started acting. We decided to go on a trip, and it was our first dream together that we were going to make come true. Planning the trip together was great, but even more inspiring was how we both began to see our futures in the same direction. "This is just the beginning," Alexander said, and I felt that his words had great power. It was the beginning of a new stage of our lives where we go into the unknown together with dreams and new achievements. We set off on a trip to Italy, a place that had always been our shared dream. Preparation for the trip was like a small holiday for the two of us. Together, we chose the places we want to visit, chose hotels and planned routes. Every day was filled with joy, because we not only dreamed, but also built our common future together. When we finally arrived at the station, getting ready to depart, I couldn't contain my excitement. Alexander looked at me and, holding my hand, said, "This will be our best trip." And I knew that any trip with him would be unforgettable. Italy was a real discovery for us. We walked the ancient streets of Rome, exploring every corner of this wonderful city. Alexander enthusiastically told me stories about the places we visited, and I noticed how his eyes lit up with inspiration. He was always ready to show me more than I could imagine. We entered the Colosseum, and I felt small compared to this greatness. "You're here, and it's already made my life great," he said as he hugged me. I felt my soul being filled with warmth, and at that moment I understood that every step with him was important and unique. During the trip, we talked a lot about the future. Alexander admitted that his new job and career opportunities make him think about new horizons for both of us. We could move to another city, build a new life together. Not only here, he said, and I saw in his eyes a desire for change. I thought for a moment and then answered, "I'm ready for any change if you're around." It was more than just a promise. It was reassurance that we choose each other, no matter what the future holds. I realized that this is exactly what we should build together. A future that we both like. A few months after the trip, we started planning our new life. Alexander received a new job offer that could open up new opportunities for us. I knew it was an important step, and although it was a difficult decision, I decided that I would be with him wherever it took him. "Wherever we are, if we're together, it's the best place," I said, and his eyes lit up with happiness. We both knew that this was just the beginning of our new adventure. It was necessary to adapt to a new environment, but I was ready to accept it with him. And so we went to a new city. The move was not only a change of place for us, but also an opportunity to open new horizons together. We were ready for new challenges, for new beginnings. Alexander found a job, and I continued to develop my projects. We were furnishing a new apartment together, turning it into our home. All these small moments when we worked together, laughed and supported each other, filled our relationship with new meaning. And when I looked at him, standing on our terrace, I realized that with him I was ready to face any difficulties. Moving to a new city was not as easy as we thought. At first, everything seemed wonderful. New opportunities, new places. But over time, we began to feel the difficulty of adaptation. Alexander was constantly busy at work, and I, on the other hand, began to feel lonely if I left a part of myself behind. We could no longer spend so much time together, and I felt an invisible barrier between us. However, one evening when he came home late and found me sitting on the windowsill looking out over the city at night, he sat next to me and said softly, "I know how you feel, and I'm going to pay more attention to us. Don't worry, we're in this together." His words were simple, but I felt how they penetrated me, dispelled my doubts. This was our small victory. When Alexander realized that I was starting to feel isolated, he did everything to change the situation. He organized a small evening for the two of us, with home-cooked food, good wine, and a romantic atmosphere. We sat, laughed, told each other our stories. It was more than just dinner. It was an opportunity to remind each other why we're together. He looked at me with such warmth that I felt my heart blossom. "You're important to me, and I want you to always know that," he said, and I felt all my doubts and worries melt away. At that moment, I realized that together we will overcome everything. Sometimes life presents such moments when you have to make difficult choices. Alexander was offered another career opportunity to go abroad for several years. It could change our lives, but I felt that it would be a real test for our relationship. "What do you want to do?" I asked him, knowing that this was not an easy question. Alexander fell silent for a few minutes, thinking deeply. "I want to stay with you, but I can't let this chance pass either. I want you to be a part of this decision, for us to decide together." I was overwhelmed with emotions, but I knew that no matter what happened, we would be together. "I'll support you no matter what you choose," I replied, and he smiled. That was the moment we really started to appreciate each other. Despite all the possibilities, Alexander decided to stay. It was not only his decision, but also a joint choice. We decided that even though career development opportunities are important, relationships and supporting each other are more important to us. I felt our bond grow stronger as we made this decision together. He said, "This is not my last chance, but you are the best thing that happened in my life, and I want to go forward with you." I smiled and we hugged. It was such a strong feeling, when you decide important issues together and know that you made the right choice. After Alexander decided to stay, we both felt that our future was getting brighter. We started making plans for the next few years, deciding where we would go next. We began to consider buying our home and discussed how we would develop our careers together. It was a new feeling, not just to dream, but to realize those dreams. Alexander looked at me one evening when we were planning new opportunities and said, "No matter where we go, I will always be by your side." And at that moment, I understood that we will be together not only in our journey, but also in every step of our lives. Everything seemed to be coming together, and we were finally finding our rhythm. However, one unexpected test made us rethink our relationship. Alexander received unexpected news. His former business partner offered him to become a co-founder of a new project in another country. It was an opportunity that could change his life and career, but it also meant a new separation. I felt my heart sink when he shared the news with me. "You might think this is a big chance for me," he said, but I could see how sad his eyes were. I thought about it and then said, "If it's your opportunity, I'll support you. But I also want us to make this decision together, not split up again." Alexander doubted for a long time. He couldn't make up his mind as this was a chance that could change everything. Every time we talked about it, I could feel his inner struggle getting stronger. And while I didn't want to hold him back, I also didn't want to lose him. "I know how you want to achieve this," I said one day as we sat together, hugging our cups of coffee. "But if you leave, I'll be here waiting for you while you find your way." Alexander looked at me with great gratitude and sadness at the same time. "I don't want to lose you. You are my stability and support." At one point, I realized that I did not want to limit him in his aspirations. Alexander was capable of great achievements, and I could not stand in his way. I understood that support for him is not necessarily to leave everything for me, but on the contrary, to let him go forward, knowing that I remain with him, even from a distance. "I'll be your support no matter what you choose. You can always count on me," I said, and his eyes lit up with warmth and gratitude. It was a big decision for both of us, but I knew that our love and respect for each other would make us stronger. A few weeks later, Alexander left. It was hard, and although we talked about it a lot, the distance still took its toll. He went abroad and I stayed at home, trying to find my place in this new stage. It was a separation, but not forever. We continued to communicate every day. Every call from him gave me strength. I realized that even at a distance, we remain one. Every day was like a test for us, but we knew that we would get through it together. Months passed, and although the separation was not easy for us, we both felt that this period strengthened our relationship. Alexander returned, and we felt how our love became even stronger after all these trials. We talked a lot about the future and how we want to continue building our lives together. "It's been a tough time, but I'm glad we're back together," he said, and I smiled. We went through everything together, and that's the most important thing. We looked at our new path with optimism, knowing that together we would overcome any difficulties. After Alexander returned, we started all over again, but with new strength. We decided to move to a new place, a spacious house on the outskirts of the city, which became a symbol of our new stage. Every step in the arrangement of this house was important for us, choosing the color of the walls, the furniture, the arrangement of the rooms. It became our joint project, and I felt how with each movement we create not just a place to live, but our common space. Alexander worked a lot on the work, and I did the decor and planned everything so that every corner of our house reflected both of us. In the evenings, we drew together on the walls and laughed, knowing that this house would be our real home. Although our relationship became stronger, problems from outside appeared again. Unexpectedly, Alexander's work duties demanded more of his time. He began to spend more time at work again, and I noticed how the distance between us began to appear again. One evening, when he came home, I realized that we don't talk as often as before. "What's going on?" I asked. He sighed and shrugged. "I'm working on a difficult project, and I don't want it to affect us." I realized that his suffering is not only his problem, but also our common concern. We decided to find time for ourselves together, even if life became difficult. We decided to take a short vacation to reconnect and spend time together. We went to the coast, to a small resort town, which became for us a real hiding place from everyday life. Resting in such a place gave us the opportunity to be for each other again without worries and stresses. Every day was filled with joint walks on the beach. In the evenings, we sat by the sea discussing our dreams. I felt us becoming one again, restoring the emotional closeness that had begun to fade over time. Alexander looked at me with a sincere smile. I realized how important your support is in my life. And I felt my heart rebuild with him. During this trip, we decided to discover even more. One evening, sitting on the terrace of the house, we started talking about our deepest experiences. Alexander told me about his fears and doubts, about how difficult it is for him to leave me when he is immersed in work. I also shared my feelings about how I sometimes feel lonely when he is too busy. I don't want our distance to become a barrier for us, I said. I'm ready to support you, but we need to spend more time together. He quietly smiled and promised that he would find a balance between work and family. It was an important conversation for both of us. After that evening, we decided that we would no longer hide our emotions. We started talking more about our feelings, discussing how to better organize our lives so that we don't lose each other. Alexander promised that he would be more attentive to me, and I promised to support him in all his endeavors. And although it was not so easy, we both understood that not only the big moments are important for us, but also the little things. The time we spend together, attention to the little things, and support in the smallest situations. I felt our bond grow stronger, and we became even closer, and our future became even clearer. After our journey and conversations that changed a lot in our lives, Alexander and I returned to the city and felt that we returned not only physically, but also emotionally. Months of changes and searching for a new balance allowed us to better understand each other. However, the return to reality was not as easy as we had hoped. Work, responsibilities, new challenges captured us again, and we began to spend less time together. I noticed how he started to lose himself in work projects again, and I felt how much we missed those moments when we spent time together. We have to find time for ourselves, I said one day when he came back late again. His gaze softened and he replied, You're right. We have to get back what we lost. We decided to take the big step and take a vacation, but this time we chose a completely different approach. We went to a small town on the ocean shore where all the sounds and sights were calm and distant from the noise of the city. There, amidst nature and simplicity, we could figure out all the issues. While walking on the beach, we talked about our future plans, but also about what we really want out of this life. I felt that this was not just a vacation, but an opportunity for us to reconnect and think about what is important to the two of us. Alexander took my hand and said, This moment is important. I want us to always remember it. Now that we have found time for ourselves again, we both see our relationship in a new light. Alexander revealed to me how difficult it was for him to balance it all, but now he understood that he could not be whole without me. You are my peace in this chaos, he said, and I realized that it was thanks to those words that we were able to strengthen our relationship again. I answered him, And you are my peace. Together we will cope with any challenge. It was a moment of real cleansing, and I felt how we were growing not only as a couple, but also as individuals. We returned home with new energy and a new perspective on relationships. Every month, we found more time for moments together, even on the busiest days. Alexander began to appreciate the time spent at home more, and I not only supported him in all matters, but also gave him space for himself. Our relationship has become more mature, stress-free, and pressure-free. One evening, as we sat together, he looked at me and said, I want to create a life that we will both love. And I understood what he meant. We were ready to start a new stage and continue to build a common future. We set ourselves a new goal, to create a joint business. It was another adventure for us, an opportunity to turn our ideas and desires into reality. Alexander was very excited, and I supported him, knowing that this would give us a chance not only to grow, but also to create something together. We discussed how we would work together to create a product that reflected our values and vision. It was a moment for both of us when we realized that we could achieve anything we dreamed of if we worked together. When we decided to launch our business, we were both full of enthusiasm. However, as it often happens, the beginning was not so simple. Working on a new project required a lot of effort and time, and our team was not as big as we had planned. Alexander immersed himself in work, and I saw how he began to forget about important moments that used to give us joy. We no longer spent evenings together, and I began to feel the distance creeping back in. One evening, after another long day at work, I asked, "Do you even remember the last time we just sat together and laughed?" He paused for a moment, then admitted, "I know we're drifting apart. I don't want that." And it became a turning point for both of us. That evening, we decided to take a break. Alexander closed his laptop, and we sat down at the table where we used to spend our evenings with a cup of tea. He looked at me and said, "You're right. I forgot why we started this journey together. We don't have enough time for ourselves." I smiled when I heard those words and said, "We don't need to change the whole world. We need to change our habits." This was the moment when I realized that we needed time to reset to bring our relationship back to a new level. For the next few days, we decided to revise our plans and find more time for ourselves. Alexander wrote down free time in the calendar, and we started organizing the weekend together as it was at the beginning. We returned to simple joys: walks in the city, dinners in the kitchen, and conversations until late at night. I felt like we were on the same page again, and it was the best thing that could have happened to our relationship. We decided that now every month we will plan at least one day just for us, without work and without fuss. This became our new rule that allowed us to maintain our connection despite all circumstances. Alexander, despite our agreement to spend more time together, decided that he needed to work hard on a new project to promote the business. And I knew that his determination and ability to influence people would help make him successful. But at the same time, I was worried that it might take his attention away from me again. I shared my experiences with him, and he promised again that he would be more in control of his times. "We're together, and that's the most important thing to me," he said. And I understood what he really meant. We decided that together we could find a balance between work and relationships without letting either of us feel alone. Over time, we began to understand that the most important thing is not the amount of time we spend together, but how this time is filled with meaning. Alexander and I realized that by working on joint projects and goals, together we changed not only our environment, but also ourselves. Once, sitting together after a long day at work, Alexander said, "I'm glad we got through this. We're together, and that's the most important thing." I looked at him and said, "Me too. And now we know for sure that our relationship is not just a part of life. It's the foundation of everything we build." Despite our best efforts to maintain a balance between work and relationships, new challenges did not take long. Alexander began to feel enormous pressure because of the new project he took on. He began to stay late at work, and I could see how fatigue began to affect his mood. It wasn't easy for either of us. Once, after one of the hard days when he returned home, his eyes were clouded with fatigue. "I can't do this anymore," he said. I went up to him, hugged him, and said, "You are not alone. We will solve this together." We realized that time for yourself is still important and that certain adjustments need to be made to find time for rest and recovery. This moment became a turning point for us. We decided together that we need to rethink how to allocate time and effort. Alexander began to pay more attention to health and rest, and I helped him find a balance between work and personal life. We decided to set clear boundaries so we wouldn't lose each other because of work. It was a difficult but important conversation. "I want us to always find time for ourselves," I said, and he agreed. From that moment on, we started building new habits and priorities, and our relationship became even stronger. A few weeks later, Alexander was faced with an unexpected problem at work. An important project was in a critical situation, and he had to solve several important issues that required immediate attention. It was a lot of stress for him, but I realized, watching him, that he needs support now more than ever. I offered to help him organize a plan of action, even though I knew it was more about his work. Alexander was surprised by my initiative, but I just felt that we should be a team in everything. "You always know what to say," he said, and I felt his worries begin to ease with my support. One evening, after we resolved the situation at work, we went for a walk to relax and talk about everything that had happened. We walked through the park, listening to the silence and sometimes laughing at little things that once seemed important. I think the most important thing is not to run after the perfect life, but to be in the moment, I said. Alexander looked at me with warmth in his eyes and said, "We already have a perfect life because we are together." These words filled me with peace and joy. They reminded me that our life was already wonderful, despite all the difficulties. We continued to grow as a couple. Alexander and I understood that the most important thing in our relationship is mutual support. Lately, I have become more appreciative of every moment when we are together, when we laugh together, or sit quietly next to each other without saying anything. One evening, after a long day, Alexander simply took my hand and said, "I am grateful that you are in my life." I answered, "And I am grateful that you are with me." And these became the most important words at that moment. We realized that our relationships are what make our lives complete. A few months later, we began to see the first results of our joint efforts. Our business began to bring the first successes. Alexander and I worked together, and although it was not easy, we understood that together we could cope with any difficulties. One evening, when we got our first big contract, I couldn't hold back my emotions. "We did it," I said, and Alexander, smiling, hugged me. It was not only a victory in business, but also our joint victory in life. We proved to ourselves that by supporting each other, we can achieve anything.